Welcome the anointed ones. Truth doesn't shake the room. It detonates everything pretending to be stable. Chosen one. That's exactly what just happened when you finally opened your mouth. The moment you stopped letting people narrate their version of events and started telling the actual story, entire personalities began malfunctioning like a software update they weren't prepared for. And now, they're spiraling so hard you'd think someone unplugged their emotional Wi-Fi. People love control until you start returning the receipts they thought you deleted. And here's the wild fact. Psychologists say the human brain reacts to being exposed the exact same way it reacts to physical danger, with panic, distortion, and denial. So when you called out everything point blank, no filter, no sugarcoating, no pretending, their nervous system started glitching like an old TV trying to pick up a channel that doesn't exist anymore. You didn't embarrass them, you unveiled them. And unveiling someone who has survived purely on illusion is like snatching away their favorite costume mid-performance. Suddenly they're standing there with nothing but their true character showing, and it's not nearly as flattering as the role they rehearsed. That's why they're running in circles, overthinking every syllable you said, replaying your words like a Netflix series they never wanted to binge-watch. Some of them even tried rewriting the story in their heads, but unfortunately for them, your truth came stamped with clarity, timing, and divine precision. It wasn't petty, it wasn't emotional, it was accurate, and accuracy hits different. See, they were comfortable when you were quiet, manageable when you were confused, predictable when you were doubting yourself. But the moment you spoke from a place of healed self-awareness, the power dynamic didn't just shift, it flipped the entire table. Now they're scrambling to pick up pieces of a reputation that depended on you never saying a word. And let's be honest, the funniest part, the same people who swore you were overreacting are now reacting like they lost the presidential election, the season finale, and their favorite wig all on the same day. This is what happens when a chosen one calls things out with precision. People don't just get uncomfortable, they unravel. So today, we're diving deep into why your truth has them spiraling, stumbling, and suddenly reconsidering every lie they ever told about you. All because you finally said what needed to be said. Number one, they never expected you to speak the truth with receipts. The funny thing about people who build whole narratives around you is that they always assume you'll stay quiet forever. They mistake your patience for permission and your grace for ignorance. So when you finally opened your mouth and laid everything out clearly, calmly and confidently, it hit them like a plot twist they never rehearsed for. You didn't come with vague accusations or emotional outbursts. You came with details, patterns, consistency, and the kind of honesty people can't argue with. That's what threw them off balance. You didn't present a story, you presented evidence. What really shook them was the accuracy. Your truth wasn't shaky or scattered. It was grounded. You remembered the conversations they thought you'd forgotten, the actions they hoped you'd overlook, and the behaviors they assumed you'd never connect. And you didn't weaponize your truth. You clarified it. You spoke like someone who had finally stepped out of confusion and into understanding. And that alone dismantled the entire version of events they'd been selling to others. The moment you spoke, you exposed not just what they did, but how long they'd been relying on your silence to keep up their performance. That's why they're spiraling. You didn't just call out an incident, you revealed a pattern. And when people know they've been operating in manipulation, the last thing they want is someone who can describe their tactics better than they can. It makes them feel naked, not physically, but morally. Their reaction now is the clearest confirmation that you struck the truth. If what you said was exaggerated or baseless, they'd be calm. They'd be unaffected. But the panic, the scrambling, the sudden urge to defend themselves before anyone even asked, That's because you hit the exact spot they were hoping you'd never see. You exposed the illusion they spent so long maintaining. Your truth didn't destroy them. It just revealed who they've been all along. And that revelation is something they can't run from, rewrite, or silence anymore. Number 2, your call-out forced them to confront the character they pretend not to be. The truth is, some people walk around wearing a personality they created, not the one they actually live with. They've spent years polishing an image, the calm one, the kind one, the misunderstood one, the victim, the helper, the everybody else is the problem except me character. They get so comfortable in that costume that they forget someone out there has seen the real version of them up close, and that someone was you. When you spoke up, it wasn't just a call-out. It was a reminder that you've witnessed parts of them that their audience has never met. That alone is enough to make anyone spiral. What shook them wasn't the fact that you addressed the issue. It was that your words matched the truth they've been running from. You didn't exaggerate. You didn't add drama. You simply named what they've been hiding. And deep down, they knew everything you said lined up perfectly with the parts of themselves they refused to confront. They weren't offended because you lied. They were offended because you didn't. This is why their reaction feels so dramatic. When someone has worked hard to create a version of themselves for public approval, any truth that exposes their private behavior feels like a threat. They don't want people to know about their temper, their manipulation, their selfishness, or their lack of accountability. They don't want anyone to see the cracks in their image, because the image is the only thing holding their world together. You forced a level of self-reflection they weren't prepared for. Hearing the truth from someone who actually knows them is uncomfortable. Hearing it from someone who finally stopped filtering themselves is even worse. It makes them confront the fact that their good person performance depends on people not knowing the whole story. That's why they're spiraling now, not because you exposed them publicly, but because you exposed them internally. And that kind of truth doesn't fade. It stays with them. It lingers. It forces them to rethink the character they've been acting as, and whether they're ready to grow into someone real or keep pretending. Number 3, you triggered the collapse of their social illusion. There are some people who survive off reputation more than reality. They curate how they want to be seen. They rehearse the version of themselves they want people to believe. And they work overtime to make sure no one ever questions the image they've built. It's not authenticity, it's branding. And they've been branding themselves for years. So when you spoke up and shared the truth, you didn't just challenge their behavior. You threatened the entire identity they've constructed for the world. That's why things fell apart so fast. You weren't trying to expose them. You were simply telling your truth. But your truth didn't match their performance. And that mismatch caused cracks in their carefully decorated facade. People started taking a second look. They noticed inconsistencies. They replayed past stories. They connected dots they previously ignored. And the person who once seemed so harmless, so innocent, or so put together, suddenly didn't look as flawless as they claimed to be. When someone's public image is more important to them than their character, they panic the moment those two worlds collide. You didn't bring chaos. You revealed the chaos they were hiding. Their entire identity depended on you staying quiet, confused, or intimidated. The second you spoke up, you gave others permission to reevaluate what they thought they knew. That alone is enough to send anyone spiraling. What's interesting is that the people who truly have nothing to hide don't crumble when the truth shows up. They stand, they listen, they adjust. But the ones who rely on performance, they start scrambling, explaining, overreacting, or pretending to be wounded to keep attention away from their cracks. That's exactly what you're seeing now. Not a reaction to your words, but a reaction to the fear of losing the version of themselves they've spent years selling. They weren't afraid of you embarrassing them. They were afraid of losing control over the story. And that's what your honesty did. It pulled the rug out from under the illusion. Now they have to face the reality that the person they pretend to be is no longer the person everyone automatically believes. Number 4. You removed the fear they relied on to control you. For a long time, they counted on one thing to keep you in place: fear. Not the loud kind, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet fear that sits in your chest and makes you second-guess yourself. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being blamed, fear of being attacked, fear of losing people, fear of being labeled the problem. They knew as long as you held on to that fear, they could predict you, manage you, and even manipulate you without much resistance. That fear was their foundation. It kept you cautious, hesitant, and easier to control. But something shifted in you. You reached a point where the fear didn't sit the same way anymore. It lost its grip. You grew, healed, outgrew old insecurities, and learned more about yourself. You became someone who knows your worth, your voice, and your truth. And once you stepped into that version of yourself, you didn't respond to their pressure the same way. You didn't fold. You didn't freeze. You didn't shrink. You didn't allow their reactions to dictate your decisions. You simply stood firm, and that alone dismantled their entire approach. When you called everything out, it wasn't from anger or desperation. It was from clarity. The moment they realized you weren't intimidated, they felt the ground shift under their feet. They weren't prepared for a version of you who no longer seeks their approval, who no longer fears their judgment, and who no longer engages from a place of insecurity. They lost the advantage the second you stopped playing small. And here's the part they'll never admit. They depended on your fear more than you ever depended on them. They used your worries as leverage. They used your silence as a cushion. They used your uncertainty as protection. Without those things, they have nothing left to control you with. Their reactions now, the panic, the defensiveness, the dramatic spirals, are coming from the realization that they can't influence your emotions anymore. You didn't become fearless. You just stopped letting fear be the steering wheel. And when someone's power only exists because you're afraid, your courage becomes their collapse. Number 5, your confidence exposed their dependency on your silence. Some people don't just want you quiet, they need you quiet. Your silence wasn't just convenient for them, it was the glue holding their entire comfort zone together. As long as you stayed small, uncertain, apologetic, or hesitant, they felt safe. Not safe in the emotional sense, safe in the sense that their behavior would never be questioned, their patterns would never be recognized, and their power would never be challenged. Your silence kept them in control. Your confidence broke that spell. The moment you spoke with certainty, everything shifted. You weren't shaky, you weren't unsure, and you didn't sound like someone trying to justify themselves. You spoke with a voice rooted in clarity, growth, and self-worth. And that kind of confidence is threatening to people who built their identity around you being the lesser one. It wasn't just what you said, it was who you became while saying it. Your confidence revealed something they never wanted to confront. Their entire sense of superiority depended on you dimming your own light. They needed you to doubt yourself so they could feel right. They needed you to stay quiet so they could appear innocent. They needed you to shrink so they could appear bigger. Everything they built stood on the assumption that you would never find your voice. And the fact that you finally did, calmly, boldly, unapologetically, shook the core of their self-image. Their panic now is not about your words. It's about the implication behind your courage. It shows you've outgrown the version of yourself they were comfortable manipulating. It shows you're no longer the person who hesitates before speaking up. It shows you're done granting them unearned authority over your emotions, decisions, and truth. They don't fear your honesty. They fear the new balance of power that honesty reveals. They can't place you back into the old mold because you've evolved past it. You've expanded beyond the space they kept you in. And once a chosen one finds their voice, everyone who depended on their silence is forced to face themselves. And that's the part they can't handle. Number 6, their spiral is proof of how much energy they invested in the lie. People don't fall apart over things that don't matter to them. They only spiral when something they've built with a lot of effort starts to crack. Their dramatic reaction, their sudden panic, their over-the-top defenses, all of it is proof that your truth hit the exact spot they've been protecting for years. If what you said was insignificant, they'd shrug it off. They'd move on. They'd stay calm. But the way they're unraveling tells you everything about how deeply they were invested in maintaining the story they created about you. They didn't build that lie overnight. It took time, manipulation, selective storytelling, and a lot of behind-the-scenes planning. They shaped narratives in conversations you weren't present for. They planted seeds in people's minds long before you ever realized what they were doing. They managed your image the way someone manages a brand, carefully, intentionally, and quietly. They assumed their version would stand forever because they believed you would never find the strength or clarity to challenge it. When you finally spoke your truth, you didn't argue with them. You didn't fight. You simply stepped out of the box they put you in. You stopped feeding the story they depended on. And once you withdrew your participation, the whole structure started falling apart. You didn't destroy anything. You just stopped holding up your end of their illusion. That's why everything collapsed so fast. Their lie was standing on your silence, not on its own integrity. Their panic now is the reaction of someone realizing their investment has no value anymore. Years of manipulation can't overpower one moment of clarity. You didn't need to expose them with drama or anger. Your truth did the work for you, and that's what they can't handle. The story they curated so carefully is crumbling because the person at the center of it finally told the truth. Their meltdown is the confession they'll never say out loud. The lie meant more to them than the relationship ever did. They protected the narrative harder than they protected you. And now that the truth is out, they're left standing in the ruins of something they built with their own hands. Number 7, you forced accountability in a space where accountability never existed. Some people grow up in environments where they are never checked, never corrected, and never held responsible for the consequences of their actions. They get used to moving through life without ever being questioned. They assume they're always right, always justified, always the victim, and always entitled to sympathy no matter what they do. It becomes their comfort zone, a world where accountability simply doesn't exist. So when you came along and finally called things out the way they truly are, you didn't just challenge them, you disrupted an entire ecosystem they depended on. Your honesty didn't just expose their behavior, it exposed their lack of practice when it comes to owning their mistakes. They don't have the emotional muscles for accountability. They don't have the maturity to sit with their wrongs without turning into the injured party. They don't have the self-awareness to handle being confronted with a truth that doesn't paint them in a flattering light. So instead of facing what you said, they spiraled. They panicked. They reacted like someone being cornered, not because you attacked them, but because they have no tools for self-reflection. What really shook them was how calmly you said the truth. You weren't cruel. You weren't extra. You weren't trying to embarrass them. You simply labeled what happened with accuracy, and that alone felt like a threat. People who've never been accountable see any form of truth as hostility. They think being corrected is disrespect. They think being confronted is betrayal. They think being asked to grow is punishment. And that mindset is exactly why your words hit them so hard. Their meltdown now is proof of how sheltered they've been from responsibility. They've spent so long escaping consequences that the smallest dose of accountability feels unbearable. You changed the gravity when you refused to sugarcoat reality. You shifted the entire dynamic by not playing along with their excuses, defensiveness, or emotional theatrics. You didn't attack them. You simply stopped protecting the version of themselves they hide behind. And now they're spiraling because for the first time, someone is holding up a mirror they can't control, dim, or walk away from. Number 8. You exposed the two realities they've been living in. Some people live in two different worlds at the same time, the one they perform for everyone else, and the one they operate in behind closed doors. They put on a polished, harmless, reasonable image for the public, and then switch to a completely different personality when no one is watching. They've gotten so used to juggling these two realities that they forget someone like you has seen both. You know the tone they use when people aren't around. You know the patterns they hide. You know the small details that don't match their innocent front. And when you finally spoke up, you didn't expose them. You connected the dots. That alone was enough to send their world into chaos. They were banking on those two versions never meeting. They assumed they could keep their public reputation intact as long as you stayed quiet about the private version they try to bury. But the moment you spoke with clarity, their biggest fear came to life. The truth you shared wasn't dramatic or exaggerated. It simply revealed what they've been desperately trying to separate. You didn't attack them. You didn't lie. You just told the same truth they work overtime to hide. That's why they're spiraling. You forced their two identities into the same room, and the collision exposed every inconsistency they've been smoothing over for years. People around them started noticing the gaps. They realized the stories don't line up. They saw the difference between the calm persona and the chaotic behavior. Your honesty made it impossible for them to keep switching characters without being questioned. What hurts them most is that your words didn't rely on emotion. They relied on reality. There's nothing more threatening to someone who lives a double life than a person who speaks from experience instead of assumption. They can't argue with lived truth the way they argue with rumors or opinions. Their loss of control isn't about your call-out. It's about the merging of the world they perform in and the world they hide in. That's what breaks people who rely on illusions. When the mask slips and everyone finally gets a glimpse of the person behind it. You didn't expose them maliciously. You simply refused to keep pretending there were two versions to protect. Number 9. You proved you're not the same character they wrote in their script. For a long time, they relied on the version of you they created in their heads. They wrote you into a role that made their life easier. The quiet one, the compliant one, the unsure one, the person who second-guessed everything. That version of you was convenient. It let them feel superior, in control, and justified in treating you however they wanted. They didn't want to see your intelligence, your strength, or your growth. They preferred the script they wrote, not the person you actually are. But the moment you spoke your truth, calmly, clearly, and with emotional maturity, the character they had assigned you fell apart. You didn't respond the way they expected. You didn't fold the way they predicted. You didn't react from insecurity or desperation. Instead, you showed a level of self-awareness that didn't exist in their story. Your clarity disrupted their entire narrative, and when someone has built a whole identity around feeling above you, your growth feels like betrayal. Their spiral now isn't anger, it's grief. They're mourning the loss of the version of you that made them feel powerful, the person who was easier to manipulate, the person who didn't know their own value, the person who apologized just to keep the peace. That character served their ego, and when you evolved beyond it, you took away the control they had been enjoying for years. What shocked them most was how effortlessly you outgrew their expectations. You didn't become loud or confrontational. You became grounded. You responded with truth instead of emotion. You held your position instead of shrinking. You showed them you've been learning, healing, and paying attention. And nothing threatens a manipulator more than someone who finally understands themselves. They're not grieving you, they're grieving the script. The storyline where they were the wise one, the savior, the harmless one, or the victim. Your evolution ruined their plot. Your strength ruined their assumptions. Your clarity ruined the power imbalance they depended on. And now they're spiraling because the one thing they never expected happened. You became the version of yourself they can no longer control, predict, or contain. Number 10. You revealed the emotional debt they owe but can't repay. You didn't just speak up. You presented a spiritual invoice. And when that bill hit the table, it exposed the economy of imbalance they've been benefiting from like a secret bank account. For years, they've been overdrawing from your peace, your patience, your loyalty, your emotional labor, fully expecting you to never calculate the cost. They assumed you would stay quiet, stay confused, or stay forgiving long enough for their conscience to expire. But when you told the truth, calmly, clearly, and without bitterness, you forced them to look at the accumulated interest of their own behavior. You didn't demand repayment. You didn't beg for closure. You didn't ask for validation. You simply stated what was, and that alone shattered them. Because deep down, they know they do not have the moral credit, emotional maturity, or spiritual currency to pay back what they took. That's why they spiral. Not because your words were harsh, but because your clarity was clean. Not because you attacked them, but because you illuminated them. Not because you exposed them to the world, but because you exposed them to themselves. You forced them to confront the unpayable balance of their actions, a balance they've avoided, minimized, or justified for years. The truth wasn't a weapon, it was a mirror. And some people would rather shatter their own life than acknowledge the reflection. Number 11. You activated their shame, and shame has no off switch. Shame is a different kind of fire, one that doesn't burn and disappear. Guilt can fade with apology or repair, but shame runs deeper. It doesn't say, "I did wrong." It says, "I am wrong." It burrows into the core of a person, into all the hidden corners they've been avoiding, hiding, and pretending don't exist. When you called out their behavior, you didn't just highlight a mistake or a misstep. You pierced a wound they've been carrying quietly, often since childhood, and one they've never fully learned to manage. They've spent years covering it up, hiding it behind arrogance, deflection, manipulation, or control. And that's why your words hit harder than they anticipated. They weren't just hearing criticism. They were confronting an internal truth they've avoided their entire life. Suddenly, the strong or in-control persona they've shown the world is exposed as fragile, reactive, and defensive. Your clarity revealed not just their behavior, but the deep insecurity they've tried to mask. That's why they're spiraling. Shame doesn't calm down like fear or anger can. It doesn't respond to logic or explanation. It erupts. It twists reactions into overreactions. It forces people to act irrationally, to overcompensate, to lash out or retreat into denial. And that eruption isn't about you. It's about the emotional weight they've carried in silence, the skeletons they never wanted to unpack, and the parts of themselves they've refused to face. By speaking your truth, you didn't create their shame. You simply activated a part of them that's always been there. And once shame is exposed, it has no off switch. It loops, it festers, it dominates thought and action. Their panic, their confusion, their sudden overreactions are proof that the foundation they thought was solid has always been cracked underneath. You didn't break them. You made them meet themselves. And the experience of being confronted by a truth they can't escape is far more destabilizing than anything anyone else could ever do. Number 12. You showed them. You understand their tactics better than they do. What shook them wasn't just that you finally spoke up. It was the precision in the way you named things. You didn't just point out what they did, you highlighted the intention behind it. And that's a level of understanding most people never reach. They were prepared for you to be emotional, confused, overwhelmed, or flustered. What they weren't prepared for was your clarity. Your breakdown of their patterns wasn't an outburst, it was analysis. And that is what rattled them down to their core. People who thrive on manipulation survive by staying one step ahead. They rely on others being unsure, doubting themselves, second-guessing their own instincts. You ended that advantage the moment you showed them you see the architecture behind their actions. You saw the cycle, not just the moment. You saw the motive, not just the behavior. You saw the pattern they've used on others for years and dismantled it in seconds. That level of comprehension is dangerous to someone who depends on confusion to maintain control. You didn't fall for the deflection. You didn't get lost in the emotional fog they tried to create. You didn't respond to the bait or chase the distraction. You went straight to the root. And there is nothing more threatening to a manipulator than someone who understands their psychology. It means they can't twist the story anymore. They can't pretend. They can't pull you back into the old dynamic. Your ability to articulate the truth with insight made them feel exposed in a way they've never felt before. Suddenly, the game they've been playing doesn't work on you. The tactics lose their power. The manipulation becomes ineffective, and now they're left with the one thing they've always avoided: being seen for who they truly are. You didn't just take away their control, you took away their illusion. And once someone realizes you understand them better than they understand themselves, they know they can't hide anymore. That's why they're spiraling. That's why they're scared. You dismantled the entire playbook they thought you'd never read. Number 13. You clarified the boundary. They thought you'd never enforce. The moment you spoke your truth, you did more than expose what they did. You made it unmistakably clear that their access to you has limits now. And that hit them harder than anything you said. People who are used to crossing boundaries without consequence genuinely believe the privilege will last forever. They assume your kindness is guaranteed. They assume your patience is endless. They assume your silence is compliance. So when you finally drew that line, not with anger but with certainty, the shock rippled through them like a jolt. Your boundary wasn't just a wall, it was a revelation. It showed them exactly how much space they were taking, how much energy they were draining, and how much power they were operating with that was never theirs to begin with. They didn't spiral because you confronted them. They spiraled because you reclaimed your authority. You shifted the dynamic in a way they can't undo. For years, they depended on the version of you that absorbed the damage quietly. They counted on the version of you that tolerated the excuses, overlooked the disrespect, or carried the emotional weight they refused to acknowledge. When you enforced the boundary, it forced them to face the truth. The access they enjoyed was a privilege, not a right. And now that privilege is revoked, that's where the panic comes from. Not guilt, not remorse. Loss. They lost control. They lost influence. They lost the ability to shape your emotional world or manipulate your reactions. They lost the comfort of knowing you'd always make space for them, even when they didn't deserve it. What they're experiencing is withdrawal from power they were never meant to have. Your boundary interrupted their cycle. It broke their rhythm. It forced accountability, distance, and reality. Three things they've avoided their whole lives. And here's the irony. The boundary they once mocked, dismissed, or pushed against is now the same boundary haunting them. because it's the moment they realize they don't get to operate in your life on their terms anymore. Your boundary is their downfall. Number 14. You made it impossible for them to rewrite the story. What unravels them now isn't just the truth. It's the fact that you told it first and told it with such clarity that there's no space left for their revisions. For people who survive through distortion, secrecy, and selective storytelling, control over the narrative is everything. They've always depended on being the first one to talk, the one who frames the situation, the one who plants the version that benefits them. They've always relied on being the narrator while you were expected to stay silent, confused, or too overwhelmed to speak. But the moment you voiced your truth, plainly, calmly, and without hesitation, you froze the entire script. You put down the facts before they had the chance to twist them. You took away their favorite weapon, the ability to shape how others perceive what happened. And that's the exact moment their spiral began. It's not your honesty that scares them, it's your accuracy. Your clarity is sharp, detailed, and consistent, the kind of truth that can't be undone or overshadowed by theatrics. When someone is used to manipulating the narrative, a clean, straightforward truth becomes a trap they can't escape. It becomes the official record, the reference point, the version everyone returns to. And here's the part that really shakes them. They know your version is the real one. They know you didn't exaggerate, embellish, or dramatize. You simply removed the fog they'd been hiding behind. You didn't just share events. You shared intentions, timelines, patterns, and context. You turned scattered moments into a coherent story, and once a story has coherence, it becomes undeniable. Now, every time they try to adjust the story, they look ridiculous. Every attempt to redirect the blame or fabricate a new angle collapses under the weight of your truth. They've lost control over how others see them, and even worse, how they see themselves. You didn't just speak, you documented. You stamped the truth into the narrative so firmly that any attempt to rewrite it only exposes them more. Your clarity didn't just end their version, it erased their ability to create another one. That's why they're spiraling. The pen is no longer in their hand, and they know the story stands exactly as it should. Chosen one, the truth you spoke wasn't just words. It was a seismic shift. Every point you called out, every boundary you enforced, every piece of clarity you delivered, dismantled the illusions, manipulations, and false narratives people relied on for control. You didn't just expose behavior. You revealed motives, patterns, and the reality they've been hiding from themselves for years. Your courage, precision, and confidence struck at the core of their carefully curated world, and their spirals are proof of how deeply your truth resonates. You didn't act out of anger or revenge. You acted from alignment, integrity, and a level of self-awareness that cannot be intimidated. Every reaction they're having, panic, defensiveness, defenseless spirals, is evidence that they can no longer manipulate, confuse, or exploit you. You removed the fear they relied on to control you, exposed the emotional debt they can't repay, and clarified boundaries they thought you'd never enforce. You aligned their private reality with their public mask and made it impossible for them to rewrite the story. In doing so, you proved that your power doesn't lie in reaction, but in truth, clarity, and unwavering self-possession. Their breakdown isn't your victory in the traditional sense. It's the universe reflecting back the consequences of their own choices. You didn't create chaos. You simply stopped participating in it. You stepped into your role as a chosen one, fully awake, fully aware, and fully aligned with the truth, and that alone dismantled the structures of manipulation and control that have relied on your silence for far too long. This is your moment. Your voice matters. Your clarity matters, your boundaries matter, and your evolution is unstoppable. The people spiraling around you are no longer a threat. They are the proof of your growth, your integrity, and your spiritual authority. Your truth is now the permanent record, and there is nothing they can do to change it. If this message resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more deep, brutally honest truths that elevate and empower. Like this video, share it with those who need to hear it, and drop a comment to let us know how your own truth has shifted the balance around you. Every action you take in support strengthens the community of chosen ones rising together. Don't stay silent. Your voice is power, and it's time the world hears it. God bless you.